The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
With your long-forgotten name, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
In the words of the unspeakable language, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
By the spilt blood of the wicked, who walk upon this world, sprouting the words of false idols, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
On the land of the dead harvest, that which brings the earth itself into your service, Yamal, we call upon you.
We call upon you. We call upon you. We call upon you.
Yamal calls upon you.
The Sprouting, a Call of Cthulhu actual play podcast by Blighthouse Studio. Find us on your podcatcher of choice.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today I've got an author interview to share with you. And this is an author, well, it's Vanessa Miller. Her book is The American Queen. I don't want to be like coy about it. But as soon as I read about this book, and I think I say this in the interview, I was just like, what is this history? I'm so fascinated. And so I read the book and I really loved it. And I was excited when Vanessa agreed to be on the podcast because she's talking about an era in history that, from what I understand, is not much known, even in the region where it happened, which is North Carolina, South Carolina in the United States. So we're going to talk about this in the podcast, but what her book, The American Queen, tells the story of is Queen Luella, who is the queen of the Kingdom of the Happy Land, which was a kingdom that was established near the present-day town of Tuxedo, North Carolina in Henderson County. So they acquired a whole lot of land, and we're going to talk about how that happened in this podcast coming up. But their kingdom extended from the state line of South Carolina up onto Flat Rock, an area just south of Asheville, North Carolina, where the region's mountain peaks, fertile valleys, mountain streams, and waterfalls drew many wandering souls to the land. And so this kingdom was around for several decades. I don't want to spoil the contents of her book and what happens to it, but it's a forgotten story of Black American history, and I was really excited to have Vanessa come and talk to me about it. So Vanessa herself, she's a best-selling author, entrepreneur, playwright, and motivational speaker. She lives in North Carolina with her husband and family, and she's so passionate about this story, which really comes through when you read it. So here's my interview with Vanessa Miller about The American Queen. So, Vanessa Miller, welcome to my podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to just to tell you, and I guess the listeners also, I'm always keeping an eye out for new historical fiction books that I think would be interesting for me to read, first of all, but also that I think would be interesting to talk about on the podcast. And that's often people who are lesser known from history, but also historical events that are lesser known. And when I read the little blurb about your book, which I have read, but just what caught my attention at first was like, what on earth is this story? I've never heard anything about this. So actually, because I think you write about this in the book, like in your I forget if it's the prologue or the epilogue, but how did you come to learn about this history in the first place?
I came to learn about the Kingdom of the Happy Land people by simply by saying thank you to another author who had given me an endorsement on my book, Something Good, Lisa Wingate. So I was coming back into traditional publishing. I asked her for an endorsement for my first book, Something Good, that I did when I came back into traditional publishing. And she said, I understand, I've been there. Let me take a look at the book. And we sent her the book and she was like, I loved it. Here's your endorsement. So I went back to her and I was like, thank you so much. And I happened to have just been reading one of her books. And I told her how much I enjoyed that book. And she said, I learned about that book from a Facebook friend. She said, here's another story that a Facebook friend told me about. You might be interested in it. She said, you live in North Carolina. This event happened in North Carolina. And so I said, wait a minute. When she sent it over, I said, are you giving this to me for me to look up? And she said, yeah, do your research and see if it's something you want to do. And I could not believe it. But she is just that giving, just that amazing. Lisa Wingate, I will forever sing her praises because she didn't have to tell me about this story. Not many authors would. And so I'm forever grateful for that. And I began to research it and fell in love with this story about King William, Queen Luella. I had to write it.
I think that's so fascinating that this is something that happened near where you live and it was something that you had never heard about.
Correct. And I believe that there are still a lot of people in North Carolina and South Carolina because they own land that spanned from one part of North Carolina to South Carolina. I believe there's still a lot of people in both areas that still don't know about this story. That's why I can't wait to get out and tell people about it.
Mm-hmm. So it's always hard to talk to people about their historical fiction novels because I want to talk about the book, but I don't want to give spoilers, But we're talking about, so I thought if we focused just kind of on the history and stuff. So if you could introduce to everybody and maybe just explain the way that you discovered it. What was the Kingdom of the Happy Land? How did it come about?
The Kingdom of the Happy Land came about as formerly enslaved people left their plantation in Mississippi, and they believed that there was a promised land for them, that God had a land that was for them. They didn't know where it was though. And so their whole journey was a faith journey, basically. As they left Mississippi, they left with about 50 people. And during the time of emancipation, people think, oh, this was so great. The slaves are free. But what also happened with that freedom was that you left a lot of people without any place to stay. They didn't know where they were going to go, what was going to happen next. There was also a lot of fear involved with that. And so what began to happen for them as they journeyed through Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina to get to their promised land in North Carolina, about 200 people attached themselves to them. So by the time they reached the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina, they had like 200 and some people. And by the height of their kingdom, I believe there was over 400 people that had homes there and things like that. But the journey, it was like found family. And so that also inspired me. I just reading about that and learning about the conditions that people were dealing with during that time. If you've never researched at that time, you just think, oh, okay, great. And yes, great, because they should have been free. But there was really nothing put in place to kind of help them with this new freedom that they had. And so they had to kind of learn as they go and figure their way out. And so along comes William and Luella. And at this time, they're not king and queen yet because they haven't yet found what will become the kingdom of the happy land. But they wanted to help people find their dignity and to find their happy place.
And so the name of it, you mentioned in the book, and was this something you found from your research, how they chose the name? It was based on a song?
There was a song, I believe it started based on that song. And because I can't go back in history
Yep.
and actually speak with them, as I was researching the book, I discovered this song that was out during that time, and it was called Happy Land. And it was There Is a Happy Land Far, Far Away. And so as I began to look at this, and because I wondered, why would they call it the Happy Land? Now, this was a song that was not sung by the enslaved, though. This was a song they heard the slave owners and their family members singing. And so I imagine that it couldn't have been too happy for them to hear it. But as they were journeying, I believe that they were like, now I understand that song because we're going and we're finding our happy land. And so that's how I wrote it in the book.
So that's such a good example of what I imagine as you doing this detective work, almost trying to put together clues and figure out what happened. So what sources are there? Like, what were you able to look at to find out what you were able to find out?
There was, for one, I researched the people who sold them the land. Her name was Sarepta Davis. Her husband was General John Davis, who he had already passed away years before the people from the Kingdom of the Happy Land journeyed there. Sarepta Davis had all this land. And in researching it, I discovered that the minute emancipation occurred, all of the people who were enslaved on her land left. But she is described by everyone as this giving woman, this really nice woman. And as you imagine the fact that during this time, she would be willing to sell all this land to these Black people who showed up on her door. Now, they provided a service for her first, but still, she didn't have to sell them the land. So I believe the depiction of her as this nice, benevolent woman, and that's why I wrote her as that in the book. But I also wanted people to understand that then why did all of her formerly enslaved people leave?
Yeah.
And it is because there is something about being owned. No man or woman should ever be owned by someone else. And that is why they couldn't stay on that land because they had to go out and seek their own freedom. But that is why then other people would come and they basically took over the land that was left by formerly enslaved people, but they took it over as free people. And so one thing I researched was Sarepta Davis, and I got to understand her children and why, because she had so many children. I want to say at least 7. And why none of those children, why didn't they want this land? And so I had to understand that. I researched by going to the deeds office in Hendersonville, because in Hendersonville, there's actually the deeds that show that the people from the Kingdom of the Happy Land bought this land. During this time, of course, women could not sell land. If you weren't married, you could not sell or buy land. And so you have to think Sarepta Davis's husband had already passed away. So on the deed, it is her daughter's name and her daughter's husband's name of selling the land because, she needed a husband in order to sell the land, which was what ended up happening with Queen Luella later on. As I don't want to give that away because I don't want to tell that part. I'm sorry.
No, that's the thing. Like, we don't want to spoil the actual book.
Correct. And there was actually a book that was written on the Kingdom of the Happy Land in 1950. She was a historian out of Hendersonville, and she interviewed descendants of the people from the Happy Land. So, and it was hard getting a hold of that book. But the only place that has copies of that book called The Kingdom of the Happy Land is a library in Hendersonville. And so one of the people, they copied all the pages and sent it to me. And then I actually went to that particular library. They have it like under lock and key, and they opened up like opening the vault. and I saw the book and I took a picture of it next to my book. So I studied her book. Her name is Sadie Patton Smathers, and sometimes I get it mixed up. So it might be Sadie Smathers Patton. I get the two mixed up. So I studied her book. There was also articles written in the 1950s out of Asheville, a newspaper. He did a 4-part series on the Kingdom of the Happy Land people, and it came out weekly. And I was like amazed. I was like, oh, okay. This actually ended up in the newspaper at this time. Outside of that, people didn't generally know. There was also a court case when there were 2 kings of the Kingdom of the Happy Land, King William and King Robert. And King Robert, there was a court case based on King Robert. And so you find that information out in the book. So I don't want to tell much about it. But so I was able to find that information too. And that court case provided even more information that I was able to build the story on. So it was, you have to piece together things when you're researching history. And a lot of times, with Black history going that far back, our information isn't as readily found as other people's history. But thankfully, I was able to piece together a lot of information and able to write the book with.
I love the journey of you being given the gift, like Lisa Wingate alerting you to this story and kind of giving this to you. And then the fact that you were able to find actual things to research and study, but still allowing you the room to use your imagination and be the fiction writer that you are, to build it up into a story. So did you always know that Luella was going to be the main character, the person who we see this all through her eyes?
I did when I first began to write it, because when I came back into traditional publishing, I came back in as a women's fiction writer. I have Something Good, What We Found in Hallelujah, and my book that just recently released, The Light on Halsey Street. They're all women's fiction. And so when I said, okay, I'm going to step into this historical realm, but I wanted it to be historical women's fiction. And so I knew that I was going to be dealing with Queen Luella. And I didn't know the title of the book, though. I thought I turned it in with The Kingdom of the Happy Land
Yeah.
because I was like, I don't know what we're going to call this. And it was my publisher came back and they said, Vanessa, how about the American Queen? And I instantly loved it. I was like, actually, that is what the story is. That's what we wrote. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. The American Queen.
Well, and actually that brings me to another question I think it'll be good for you to explain. So the fact they bought this land, they started the Kingdom of the Happy Land. The fact that they called it a kingdom, that it became a kingdom, that it had a king and a queen. Do you know from your research or just from your kind of figuring it out why they decided to do that instead of just calling it, just a city or a regular town, why they made it a kingdom with a king and a queen?
Right. And this is me figuring it out. I believe because you have to understand that when these people were stolen from their homeland. And most of them were born here, the ones who went over to the kingdom of the Happy Land. But their ancestors, when their ancestors were stolen from their homeland, they were stolen from a place where they saw kings and queens. And so I believe that, they understood that history in Africa. And so I think what they wanted to do was kind of replicate a kingdom, because they knew that their ancestors came from such a thing. And so that's the way I saw it.
And then, now I forget if this was in some of the extra writing you have in your book, or if I just read it somewhere else, but this is one of only 2 kingdoms that was ever in like the American continent, right?
Yes. Well, but you have to understand the one that was in Hawaii, they were annexed. So when they came over to America, it was no longer a kingdom. They were a kingdom when they were on their own. So people talk about that kingdom, but that was not you can't really consider it the first kingdom in America, because when we brought them over as part of America, they were no longer a kingdom, if that makes sense. So I consider the kingdom of the Happy Land the only kingdom in America.
I love that, and I love that the king and queen were Black people, and
Yes.
the only kingdom in America.
I loved it. I was amazed at when I researched this and just kind of taking a look at the history of it, and I was amazed at the audacity of these people formerly enslaved, and you had the audacity to call yourself king and queen. And so it just, the whole thing just was like set a fire under me. I truly believe that the American Queen is the best thing I've written, and it was because I was just so passionate about it. As I think this is one of the stories I was born to write as a writer. I absolutely loved it.
And you mentioned, because I don't want to spoil the actual content of the book, but I keep remembering things that are in your afterword. And you mentioned some other historical fiction writers who helped you with this, because this was a new genre for you. You hadn't written in historical fiction. Is there any pieces of advice you remember being given from some of the people who you consulted? And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go network by listening today. Look for the Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back.
Oh, now this was a while ago, because this book was written a couple years ago. But I do. Vanessa Riley is a historical fiction writer, and so we would sit and talk about it, because we would do like monthly group meetings for writers, and so we would all be writing on our project, and we would talk about what we're doing. And one of the scenes in the book where I have Queen Luella, where the women dress her up, and right before her coronation, Vanessa Riley and I talked about that. And because, she's the one who writes all of these with these gowns and beautiful gowns and things like that. So we talked about it, and she was able to help me with the site where I sat for hours studying each layer of the gown that has to be put on. So I love that. And then Lisa Wingate, the thing that she really helped me with was the fact of she said, Vanessa, really, if there's any cool words that you want to say while you're writing this book, she said they weren't said during that time. She was like, so you have to take them out. And so Vanessa Riley also gave me a site where I could go and type in a word if I have it in my document, and I was able to see if that word had been used during that time period. And so every writer who writes historical needs to use that. And it is, I'm not going to be able to call it right now. And so I can get it for you later, though.
Yeah, send me an email. I'll put it in the show notes afterwards. Yeah.
And so, but yeah, so I used the one Vanessa Riley gave me, and then Chandra Sparks Splund gave me another one, and I really liked the one she gave me because it gave a little more detail and things like that. So I'll send you a link to both of those.
Yeah.
And they were very helpful. I had to take out so many words in the book as I was writing it, but I really think it helped me become better as a historical fiction writer, because I really began to understand that I can't write it as a contemporary women's fiction writer, that I also am. And so it's like two different hats you have to put on if you're going to write contemporary or if you're going to write historical. They're both very different.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting just to think about the words that you would instinctively think. And I would imagine, even if you're like, oh, this word feels old fashioned, it still isn't old enough.
It's not old enough. There are some words you think, oh, I can put this in here. It's an older word. And I would go and look it up. And the first time it was used might have been in the 1930s. Well, I'm writing in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. I had to take it out. And so yeah, there were a lot of words that I wanted to have in the book that did not make the cut.
Yeah, that's so interesting. But like you said, like that really just kind of not forces you in a negative way, but it really forces you in a positive way, just to really put on that historical fiction writer hat and to really put yourself in this time period and to imagine, how would she have said this if she can't say it the way that I would have said it? Yeah. So Luella as a character, without getting into the events of the book, how did you come? Because I think when I read the book, her character comes across very well. Like, I really feel like I understood what she was like as a person, and that's just a credit to your writing. But how did you develop a character when you have, a couple of, some of the events that happened and you kind of know what she did, but how do you turn that into a fully fledged person? What was that process like?
Yeah, it was just a lot of, I had to really sit and think about her. But the one thing that kept coming up in my research about Queen Luella was that she was a dominant figure. And so I knew that I had to write her as the basically the controlling factor for everything that they did, or most things, because I didn't want her husband to be a stooge to her. And so I had to have him, at times say, hold on, wait a minute. Because, sometimes that's how we are as women. We have to be told, hold on, wait a minute. so so just reading about her life and reading about the different things with her husband, and how there was more on him as far as in when they were in Mississippi. So I knew that he was a son of the slave owner, and so was his brother. I knew that his brother could pass for white, but he couldn't, and things like that. But building her was just like, it was something I just had to sit down and I just built her step by step, because I loved everything I was reading about her. And so I wanted her to come across as a dominant figure, but I also wanted her to come across as a compassionate person, as a person who really desire good for other people. And that is one of the reasons why I began the story as I did, because I wanted you to understand her. I wanted the reader to be able to understand why she was the way she was later on in the book, when certain people were ready to leave the kingdom, and why she said, well, this is your free will. This is what you're able to do that if you want to. That she wasn't trying to hold people because of what she went through as a younger woman, what she went through as a child. She never wanted people to experience the things that she experienced. And so it was a pleasure to build her and to write her, because I wanted people to see her great compassion, and her, especially when I learned that their motto was all for one and one for all. And so if you have a motto like that, then you must treat people a certain way. And so it was just really, it was a joy to me to write her.
Are there any physical, like, are there any evidence that this was ever there? Like, were you able to visit the actual land, or is there a street named after them or anything like that?
Absolutely. There is a street that is named, it's called Kingdom Drive,
Oh, yeah.
and it is right over where the kingdom once was. And I went and I took a picture. I held the book up by the
Yeah,
sign and
yeah.
took a picture of it.
Yeah.
And I was able to walk the land of the kingdom of the Happy Land. The owners that are currently there, they were gracious enough to allow me to come on the land, and it was like something I'd never experienced, because writing the story was one thing, but being able to see this. And so I knew that they knocked down all these trees to be able to build their land. So when I'm on this land, I look out and I see all these trees that are further back. There's still plenty of trees that were further back, and I'm like, these are the trees that I was talking about. These are the ones, part of the ones that were knocked down, and the land. And then I'm able to see this trail that their wagons would drive into the land and out of the land on. a beautiful experience. I am just grateful that I was able to go and walk the land. And whenever you write historical, if you're able to go and visit, I think it's just so important for that. I'm actually taking a visit to Tulsa in March for another story that I'm writing, because even though it's 100 and some years later, you still want to be able to see it and to kind of say, okay, this was the street, this was how this was. And that was what I was able to do on the Kingdom of the Happy Land. Just be able to say, this is how the land was. This is how you come into the Kingdom of the Happy Land. And it was as I described, and so I was very happy about that.
It's so lovely because I hear like I had Vanessa Riley on my podcast a while ago when she did her last book about um Queen Charlotte. No, Queen, oh, I forget her name. But the Queen of Haiti, the last one that she just did.
Yeah, Queen of Exiles was
Queen
the
of
book.
Exiles was the book. Yeah, yeah. And so she said like she went to, London and all these places. And so she travels to the places where her books take place. But I think American history is also important to share in a different way. So it's lovely that you're able to go to see these historical sites that people don't know about in America, which is a country where I'm in Canada. So I don't know a lot about American history, but what I hear about are just the same things over and over again. But there's stories like this one, like the Kingdom of the Happy Land, that people don't know. And you could go to that place and you can share this story. And I think that's so important to sort of fill in those gaps, fill in the blanks of what the history is of this country.
Yes, and that's what I tried to do. I wanted people to be able to picture it. And so we went and we took tons of pictures. I did a video of me just standing on the land. And so I've shown it. Now I'm sure I'll re-show it as the book is getting ready to release and things like that, because I think it's important that people know that this was true. They really did own this land, and they chose to call it the Kingdom of the Happy Land. And I mean, and the research shows that they really did have thrones. And that's why I put it in the book, their thrones, and they held court. And so it was kingdom.
So this episode is coming out just before, well, tell everybody when your book is published, and then by the time they hear this, they'll be able to buy the book. So tell everybody when your book is published and kind of what events you're going to be doing and things like that.
The American Queen releases on January the 30th, 2024. And I am traveling basically through North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama on my tour for the American Queen. And so all of my dates, and I have a lot of that schedule, is on my website. But the first event on January 30th will be at Barnes and Noble at the Pineville Mall in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you live in Charlotte, North Carolina, come on out. That event begins at 6:30 p.m. I want to see everybody there as much as possible, so that we kick off this tour in a great way, because I want as many people as possible to know about this great queen, Queen Luella. And I keep saying, long may she reign in your heart.
Well, and I'm sure that this was intentional, but like February, Black History Month, this is when your book is coming out. So I think that's a time
Absolutely.
of year when this history is celebrated. And I love that because of your research in your book, now there's this new figure, Luella, but also William, also the Kingdom of the Happy Land. It's a new story for people to learn about in terms of American Black history.
Absolutely. And that's why I truly hope that during this time I'm able to get out and I'm able to spread the word about them as much as possible. Even past Black History Month, we have Women's History Month in March. Also, and so I want to be spreading the word about Queen Luella in during Women's History Month as well. You know,
Well, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your book. As I said, I read it and I thought it was so captivating. I think I sat down and read it all in one go.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, but I was just like, what's going to happen next? Because it's the mixture of like the history itself, because I never knew that story,
Mhm.
as I don't think very many people do. But also, I thought that just your writing style and the characterization of Luella, it was just really, it really all comes together, and I'm happy I got to talk to you about it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad you enjoyed the story. It was a joy for me to write this story, and I'm sure people can see that through the writing of it.
Thank you so much for joining me today. So, The American Queen by Vanessa Miller comes out. Well, it's already out when you're listening to this. Publication date was January 30th, 2024. So you can track Vanessa and see where she is at all of these events that she's going to be doing. Her website is vanessamiller.com, and there's all the information is there. You can find it. She's also on social media. And I did put she sent me afterwards the links to those websites she's talking about, where you can look up how old a word is. And I just put those in the show notes for this podcast if you're a historical fiction author also, and you're curious to know the age of various different words. And so, yeah, so this podcast, you can keep following us. I'm on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod. And if you want to get in touch with me, if you have a suggestion for an episode that you'd like, a person you think would be interesting for me to talk to, or a historical figure that I should talk about or learn about, you can get in touch with me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com, or I also have a form on my website, which is vulgarhistory.com. There's a form there where you can email me as well. We also have merch available at vulgarhistory.com/store. Or if you're outside the US, the shipping is a bit better if you use vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. We also have a Patreon. If you support the podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. So for $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of this podcast. And then if you pledge $5 or more per month, you get access to bonus episodes that are only on the Patreon. So that's things like we have the after show, where sometimes I just go a bit deeper with some of the guests who we talk to. I also do Vulgar Piece Theater, where I talk with Alison Epstein and Lana Wood Johnson about costume dramas from history. Our most recent one that we've just recorded, by the time you're hearing this, is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which you might think, like, is that a costume drama? And I would say, why not? Anyway, there's also episodes there talking about terrible men from history in episodes called So This Asshole. And anyway, that's all there if you pledge the $5 or more on Patreon. And also transcripts of recent episodes are available at vulgarhistory.com. Thank you to Evelyn Malik for providing these transcripts. And we'll be back next week. And actually, I'll tell you right now, we'll be back next week and all the month of February, basically, with more Black history content. So until next time, my friends, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Ann Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Murachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you know what lies within nothing?
No.
Do you know where it ends? Do you want to know?
Yes.
Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.